Hi, Peter. Who are we talking to today?
Well, John, today we have Stuart Phillips on the show, and he's a five rhythms dance teacher.
Five Rhythms? What's that all about?
Well, it's a way of dealing with life through a form of dance. It was developed in New York in the 1970s.
Okay, great. Let's listen to the interview.
Well, thank you for inviting me on to share about what I do and all that. I'm a five rhythms teacher, and I'll come on to what that means in a little while, but perhaps I should begin by kind of sharing a little bit about my background and how I kind of came into this particular world. So if I track back to my earliest days, I had what I might call a very normal, conventional upbringing. I didn't come from a dance or performance background. I just lived in Reading with my parents and sister. I went to a comprehensive school, and from a very early age, I got into listening to live music, live bands, and that kind of was my beginning, my inroad. But the first band I saw live that completely turned my world upside down was a kind of a post-punk band called Spear of Destiny.
Yeah, that's Kurt Brandon. Yeah,
Kurt Brandon. Yeah, at Reading University, and that set me on a journey of all those types of bands like Killing Joke and Susie and the Banshees and Ex Mile Deutschland and Echo and the Bunny Members. That was kind of the Alarm, the Clash, and all of those types of bands. That genre was what I was into as a kid, as a child, and as a teenager. But in terms of dance and dancing, it was very much one of these people that dance for me was something that you did kind of after a few beers, in a nightclub, and would never dream of doing it sober, let's say. But there was something about it. I remember watching a show on TV when I was 11 and 12, and there was like professional dancers on there, and I remember saying something about, that would be a good thing to do, and my family or my dad probably just laughed at me and said, what are you talking about? To get a real job, come on. Exactly, yeah. So that lasted a few seconds. And I went off to university, got a degree in economics, and kind of fell into doing some work. But I really had my sights set on traveling around the world, which is what I did. I kind of worked for a couple of years as a business analyst, saved up some money, paid off my debts from university, which weren't much then compared to now, and I went interrailing around Europe for I think 6 months or so. Ended up in Spain, and I got to the end of. I got to the end of summer 1991, and I was in a phase of, should I stay in Spain for the winter or should I do something else? And by chance, my cousin Nicholas gave me a call and said, Stu, I'm going to India in December, do you want to come along? I was like, India, okay, sounds good, never been there. And by luck, so my cousin called me and said, do you fancy going to India? By luck at that same time, I got a tax rebate from the HMRC,
nice.
Which was enough to fund me to go to India for 6 months. And off I went in December. I ended up travelling kind of up to Kashmir because I wanted to go skiing for some crazy reason, and there was three of us all together, and we were very clear that we weren't going to go to Goa and go to all those kind of crazy trance parties that we'd heard about. But a relatively short story, even shorter, within 3 or 4 weeks we were in Goa. and that was pivotal part of my life. Kind of I got into the Goa trance scene that was emerging at that time in the very early 90s. The music there, the trance music was something quite extraordinary that was generating a huge amount of catharsis, ecstasy. A lot of it was helped along with psychedelics, and there were a few occasions. I remember I had a friend of mine who wasn't into the whole kind of the drug scene, and she was going to these parties, and I'd go along to the party with her, and we went to a few, and we weren't getting high, and yet we'd still get really high at the end of the dance. And I think I'm just like making it up, But looking back now, there was something about that experience that would come back to me kind of 20 years later with Five Rhythms, because there was something in there about the the ability to have an experience, an ecstatic experience, simply by putting your body into movement, which I'd always associated with consuming psychedelics. But that definitely was part of it, but clearly there was something else going on. You know, it was an excessive part of my life for quite a few years, and you know, and it was a very enjoyable part of my life. But as with many things, those things take their toll. And to cut another long story short, that period of my life kind of ended with a period in rehab in early 2000s, which was a very significant turning point of my life, where I started to kind of go and discover for myself who I am as a human being. And you know, I was throwing myself into all kinds of literature, the very well-known mystics and spiritual writers of times gone by, and also current spiritual people who were giving satsangs, and I was getting throwing myself into all kinds of meditation. And then I think somebody in my social circle in 2006, 2007 mentioned to me about 5 rhythms, and I just thought, nah, this sounds way too out there. It's like, it sounds really hippie and fluffy, and I just thought, no, not my bag. Anyway, around about 2006, I became friends with a dear friend of mine called Ralph, and we actually met at a satsang, and we got into this habit of finding and sourcing out some really cool things that we could go and do, and we'd go off and do it. So one month we might be going to see Nick Cave at at Hammersmith Apollo, and the following couple of months later it would be going to see some spiritual guide who would talk about enlightenment or whatever. And anyway, he kept telling me about 5 rhythms and saying, Stu, you need to come along. There's this amazing class on the Thursday night. It's called Sweaty Thursdays. You should come along. I think you'd really like it. And I resisted it for the best part of a year. I was going, yeah, but, kind of not really, doesn't really excite me. And then finally I said, okay, fine, I'll go. And I went. And it was in a church in Vauxhall, and it was wild. It was
Really?
it was wild. There were like, I don't know, 60, 70 people, all dancing, all sober. The music was kind of quite ecstatic music. I mean, it was the music I remembered from the days of when I was in the trance scene in Goa, and something else. It was extraordinary, and it was 2 hours, and I could come out of it and then get up the next day and go to work. It was like, for me, the beginnings of all of that were, for me, it was like going to a 2-hour sober rave in the middle of the week,
Wow.
and being able to then get up and go to work and not feeling completely debilitated by it, but in fact quite enlivened and awakened by something. And that was 2007. And really from there on in, I didn't really look back. I mean, I was hooked. I was in from that one night. So that's how I discovered the practice.
Yes. So I mean, if you think back to those first dance sessions that you did, was there any reticence on your part in getting involved initially, or was your experience from Goa, did that just immediately triggered you to dance as openly and freely as you wanted, or did it take time to get to that point?
It definitely took time. I mean, I went in there and I was very excited about having found a place where I can go and dance like a crazy person for like 2 hours and then come out and be all right. But there were times when I would go in there and it would be quite nerve-wracking, because the teacher would say things like, "I'll take a partner," and I'd be like, "Well, what? What do you mean, like take a partner?" Like, how am I gonna dance with another person? And like and sometimes it would be with a female, sometimes it would be with a male, sometimes with a group. And that kind of was quite terrifying at times,
right,
to kind of step in and be seen. But that was the medicine in so many respects. It's like you come into a 5 rhythms class, and we don't generally come in. Well, in my experience, I didn't particularly come in there in any way embodied and able and willing just to kind of show up and be me. I'd come in like scared, with full of judgments about myself, judgments about other people, judgments about the music, and over a period of time, by kind of continually coming back to these, there was an ability to slowly but surely overcome those anxieties and those fears by putting the body into movement, which I found extraordinary, because it was new to me. Apart from that minuscule experience that I had like 20 years back in Goa, but it was like, okay, so maybe there is something here about putting your body into movement, because that's all we were doing. That's all I was doing.
Right.
And yeah, it was incredible. And I think after some time, as I began to deepen my relationship with the Five Rhythms practice, I started to kind of go to longer events, 1-day workshops, 3-day workshops, to kind of get a deeper understanding and experience of the practice, because I was into it, but also it was giving me a very profound experience of me becoming more of who I am, if that makes sense, of becoming whole. So it was a very rewarding journey of kind of gradual kind of awakening up to who I am as a human being.
And what actually led you to deciding that you wanted to teach this? Had you got to a point where you thought, right, this really works, or were you just looking for something to kind of do at that particular time?
I think the first question mark that came up about whether I could become a teacher was definitely not at the beginning. I looked at the Five Rhythms teachers and was just in awe of them, and it just never occurred to me that that would be something that I could do. I'd never DJ'd before, never mixed, none of that, and dancing was quite a new experience. Probably 2 to 3 years in, I was hanging out with a bunch of other friends of mine who were kind of into Five Rhythms, who were then applying for the teacher training, and they were saying, "Oh, Stu, why don't you join? Why don't you apply?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but no, but," a bit of this kind of one foot in, one foot out. I wasn't really clear on whether I really wanted to teach or whether I just loved the practice, and I knew I loved the practice, but. So I avoided it, and then the question just wouldn't go away as to whether I wanted to become a teacher or not, and it all came to a head, I don't know, maybe in 2014 or something. I had some time off work, and that gave me the opportunity to throw myself into a whole series of workshops and Five Rhythms laboratories, and I took into that the intention to become 100% clear on whether I was in love with this practice or whether I had a genuine calling to go and teach the practice and offer it to others. And that was a 2 to 3 month journey, culminating in a Five Rhythms lab with half a dozen or so other people in a barn in Devon in the middle of winter, in December, freezing cold. But I came away from that experience absolutely clear that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach. I wanted to become a Five Rhythms teacher. I can't really explain kind of how it happened, but I guess it was like by putting myself into so much movement, using this practice called the wave, which we can talk about in a little bit. It was like the layers of doubt and confusion and uncertainty were falling away, and all that was left was a very clear, yes, this is what I want to do. And right after that, all the workshops that I was attending and the classes that I was attending began to line up in a way that made them consistent with the prerequisites that I had to accomplish in order to then apply to do the training. Because to apply to the teacher's training, it's a big ask. There's a lot of prerequisite workshops, a lot of hours of dancing you have to do in order to then get to a place where you can then apply to do the training. in some ways it's a sacrifice, because I was having to take a lot of time away from my family. I was having to find the classes and workshops that were the ones for me, and I was seeking out the teachers that I could see had been around the practice for the most amount of time. Which took me to Spain, it took me to Denmark, took me to Germany, and I think this is a really important part of the process to becoming a five rhythms teacher, because when you dance that much, you experience so much physical embodiment and disembodiment, emotional experiences, to the extent that when you come to then be a teacher, most of the emotional trapdoors that are going to show up in the dance floor, wherever that may be, I've kind of been down there and I've experienced it, so that when I'm then teaching, someone else goes down that place, I'm there with them, standing, kneeling, rolling with them side by side to energetically come out and show them the way out.
Right.
Because without that, then something happens on the dance floor. If I've not been there, it might make it a little challenging to know what to do.
Right. I mean, you touched on the philosophy a little bit there. Can you go into a little more detail about the five rhythms and how they tie together?
Yeah, so, there's an awful lot I could say about that. But I think the key thing about it being a philosophy is that the practice that was brought into being by Gabrielle Roth in the 70s through her diligence at observing bodies, observing herself, observing how people move, how people function. She didn't call it five rhythms. She just saw people moved in certain ways, and over a long period of time distilled it down to five universal rhythms. And what she saw is that there's a fluid state that people can move in. There's a staccato state that people move in. There's a chaotic way of being, of moving. There's a lyrical way, and then there's a stillness. And she could see all these qualities in people, because the rhythms, these five rhythms of flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, stillness, they're the principal rhythms, and there's hundreds of rhythms. But she had this capacity of being able to distill them into these five distinct rhythms that are innate in all of us, that are actually innate in the universe. Their energies, their ways of moving, their ways of being. And when you put these five rhythms together as a dance form, she called it the wave.
Right.
So when you dance the wave, you're dancing flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness. It's a dance meditation. And what's particularly interesting about this is the fact that it is based upon a fundamental principle that when you put your body into movement, healing happens. And that's it. Like, you don't even need to know how it's happening or what is happening, but if you put your body into movement in this way, healing does happen. And when I say healing, it can be as simple as the stresses and strains of everyday life lessen their grip on us, on you as a human being. And who doesn't want a bit of that, right?
Absolutely.
There's so much to get stressed out about in this beautiful but difficult and challenging world. And we've become very good as human beings at holding on to stuff. We come out of the womb and we are born into innocence most of the time, and we go through a process of growing up, and things happen. The first time we get told off for spilling the milk or something, we're too young to understand that our parents or whoever's taking care of us is telling us off because they don't want us to get burned by hot milk. We make it mean stuff. We make it mean that there must be something wrong with me because I'm not doing the right thing. Or you get to kind of exam time and you get a B plus, and your dad says, "Well, how come you didn't get an A?" And then we don't have the capacity, or rarely have the capacity, to interpret that as being, he really wants the best for me, we kind of make a decision about that. Oh God, I'm never good enough. I'm never good enough for my dad or whoever. And you can track this kind of this process through our journey through adolescence. You know, we first get into relationships, and in my experience, they don't generally tend to work out first time round, right? But like when it happens, we don't have that capacity to step aside and be rational about it. We kind of make up all these kind of stories about how it must be that I'm not lovable or there's something wrong. So we come into the world of like, you know, believing these stories that we're not good enough, not lovable, can't be trusted, whatever that flavour is. And we go around life confused about why things aren't working out with all this stuff that's kind of like, you know, like creating this barrier to us being fully self-expressed and who we're supposed to be in the world. And then a point comes where you discover some kind of modality, let it, you know, be 5 rhythms, and what 5 rhythms does, it gives you this method, this capacity to then put the body into movement. And going back to this this fundamental principle that when you put your body into movement, those stuck thoughts, patterns, energies, experiences, memories, whatever we want to call them, they have the capacity to become loose and dissolve and lessen and melt away. And it's not about trying to banish thoughts, you know, not banishing the thoughts, because like, yeah, I'm not one. Yeah, I'm not one who knows how to banish thoughts. You know, they come and they go, but bringing awareness to what is moving us is the key, because when we're aware of it, we then have a choice to then respond or act in a certain way.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. I'm a runner myself, and I run distance, and I find it a very cathartic process. You start off with worrying about the issues and the concerns of the day. You start running and you start rationalising them as you go. And by the end of the run, you're kind of just delighted to finish the run because you've been through that physical exertion. And it struck me that the 5 rhythms kind of were similar to that running process. You know, they gave you a different stage to become conscious and to work through things as well, and help with that healing. So I saw a similarity there to my experience anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true, Peter, because I mean, running is a movement practice.
Yes.
These things like 5 rhythms, these practices like running, practices like yoga. I do a lot of yoga, hot yoga, sitting meditation. They all tap into some universal truths which allow us in different ways to unravel for ourselves who we are as human beings. Because I'm sure similar experiences happen to people who sit in a Vipassana meditation for 10 days and don't speak. The scales are pulled away from your eyes and you're kind of revealed in your raw vulnerability, you know, who you are, and you have to go through the dark night of the soul to get there. And 5 rhythms is no different. I mean, I think, you know, there have been some incredibly challenging times on the dance floor where I've been in a state of just complete breakdown as things are just getting processed through me. But you know, the breakdown is what precedes a breakthrough, and I'm sure as a runner, you know, you go through the wall and you get through the other side of the wall, and then there's something else on the other side. There's a newer version of you who now knows yourself as someone who's been able to accomplish that and gone through that experience.
Absolutely. And in terms of the actual, you know, the experience of the people who actually does, what's a typical experience of somebody who comes to your classes? Did you tend to find that's a pattern that people replicate, that the one that you've just described in terms of moving on? Is that, or is there a broader array of things?
Well, I mean, I think everyone's going to have their own unique experience when they come to a 5 rhythms class, but to generalize it, and this is a kind of averaging out the collective experience. Typically, if I have my students sharing with me at the end of the class, or sharing with the group at the end of the class, very often you'll hear anecdotes such as, you know, I didn't really want to come tonight, I was feeling tired, really pissed off, I had a really hard day, and I thought, oh, okay, fine. And you know, there's some part of me that got me to the dance floor, and you know, it was, you know, might have been a real struggle to find a way into movement, but at the end, there is this experience of being lighter and freer and very often happier and more connected and more grounded, more centered and more, I suppose more is a useful word in this context, in a comparison to how you are at the beginning. There's a transformation of being in the head and in all of those thoughts and judgments and opinions and feelings and whatnot, to being set free from those constraints. That's the general consensus, that you put yourself through the 5 rhythms wave and it sets you free.
So once you go to a class, is it like giving you a toolkit to go to future classes and understand how you can use the class to deal with those issues? You become better effectively by practice. Is that fair to say? And so people come back week in, week out. It's part of a therapy, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say from the outset, it's a very therapeutic experience, but it's not therapy as such. So I mean, I'm not qualified in any kind of medical way to offer 5 rhythms as a therapy, and it's never something that should be replaced as a replacement therapy. If you're taking a prescribed form of therapy, whether it be clinical or whatever, for health issue, mental health issue, but it is incredibly therapeutic, and that is the kind of benefits that derive. And yeah, for some, it's a practice that they come back to every week if that works with their life cadence, let's say. It's also a practice that can be done every day. I was teaching a class just this week where I was offering my students an opportunity to dance through a wave that was 1 minute per wave. 1 minute per rhythm. So the whole wave was 5 minutes, one minute per rhythm with music. And the second part of the exercise is to then dance for 5 minutes, 1 minute per rhythm perhaps, with no music.
All right. Well,
Purpose being is that you can then take this practice off the dance floor in a traditional 5 rhythms class sense, and being able to practice at home or at work. There's been times where, for example, I've been lined up for an interview or particularly challenging meeting, and I've just found a quiet room and just quickly danced through a wave just to loosen out all the stuff that's building up in my mind about, like, oh my God, I'm going to get found out, I'm going to mess up, they're going to, all that imposter syndrome stuff that kind of gets very loud when something challenging is coming up. So yeah, it's a practice that can be designed to fit into your life, as well as being a context for living. So yeah, you could just like dance a minute in chaos and release some stuff, or you could spend, I've spent 2 weeks on an island in Poland dancing 5 rhythms, every day.
really?
So yeah, it's very flexible in that regard.
No, so we're interested in the music side of things, obviously quite a lot. And what sort of music do you use? Is there any music that you exclude, or does it have to be a certain type of music, or can it be anything?
I tend not to want to exclude any music. There are some caveats to that, but the music that I play is very wide-ranging. So in terms of genre, I can play classical music, I can play trance, I can play new age, I can play punk, I can play house, I can play rock. It's very much dependent upon the theme that I'm working with. If I'm working with a particular theme, if I'm working with a particular rhythm in a class, and also the feedback that I get from the students in the room will inform the music that I want to use. So if my experience of the students in the room is that they are ungrounded, then I'll play a lot of very grounding, fluid music in order to allow them to use the movement or use the music and the movement as a way to find their own ground and find their own center, for example. So yeah, I've got a huge array of music. There are some exceptions, I think. There are some, I tend to steer away from music that has got suspect lyrics in it.
Yeah.
I don't particularly need a lot of bad language in my in my classes. Not to never say never, but I just want to be responsible for how the music lands in the ears of all of my students. Yeah, some music might be culturally inappropriate to play depending where I'm teaching. So I'm just mindful of how the music might land in the ears of others from other cultures.
And you don't need a dance background to do this. Myself and John could just turn up at one of your classes and just get straight into it. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. It's it's called a dance meditation practice. To be more accurate, it is a movement meditation practice. It uses music. Music helps us. It helps us guide us to the energy of each of the rhythms. I could teach a class with no music. The music it definitely helps, but we could do this with no music for 2 hours all day for 2 weeks if we needed to. And in terms of do you need any dance background? Absolutely not. I came in with zero dance background. Gabrielle is often quoted as saying, if you have a body and you're breathing, then you're already a dancer. Right. Meaning that the 5 rhythms are in us. They are a part of us, as I said earlier. So yeah, there's no steps to learn. There's no choreography. It's not like you're going to a salsa class where you have to follow the steps of the leader or the person in front. It's about unraveling and finding your own way of being fluid, finding your own way of being in the staccato rhythm, in that kind of connected, your own way of unraveling in chaos, your own way of being, the creative artist in lyrical, and your own way of finding that beautiful stillness in the 5th rhythm of stillness, where your attention becomes on the space between movements rather than the meditation being on the movement. So I don't teach anybody how to move. I just guide them to be able to show up in a way that they can find those rhythms for themselves. So yeah, come along.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. That was brilliant. I mean, Stuart, that was fantastic. That was a really good description of what you do, really clear, and I think that went really well.
Well, I teach on a Monday and a Friday in a school called Marlborough Primary School in Chelsea, just down the road from South Kensington Tube Station. And I run a monthly class called Recharge in Wimbledon at Soraya Hot Yoga Studios in SW19. And at the moment, I'm also covering for a colleague of mine who's on sabbatical in a place in Chestnut Grove on a Wednesday night for the next month or so. And then throughout the year, I'll be running classes and workshops and longer retreats that are starting to kind of bubble up as I fill out my year with extra work. And you can go to mydancemovement.com, which is my website, or you can go to the 5rhythms.com global website and look up my name. You'll find me there. But if you just type in 5 Rhythms with Stuart into Google, for example, then I show up on those.
But no, that was really good. I mean, you've had an interesting journey for sure. And obviously, a lot of the bands you like are the bands that you come from a similar background to myself. I liked all the punk stuff and all the post-punk stuff and what have you. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, that was nice to share a bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's good. Did you find it cathartic?
Yeah, it's good to kind of share and kind of relive some of the stuff. That's great.
But it could be cool. It could be fine. Yeah.
Right, that was really interesting, hearing about the concept and his journey. And I've got to say, I love the expression, dance as if nobody's watching. Where can we find out more?
Well, Johnny has a website, mydancemovement.com. You can find out further details of where and when classes are held.
Okay, and who's on next time?
Well, we have Charlie Hall, the musical medium.
Musical medium. Looking forward to hearing from her.
Thanks for listening to 2Ds in a Pod.
See you next time. Dance as if nobody's watching.